The beautiful Buryatia stretches along Lake Baikal across 300,000 square kilometers of poverty and hopelessness. This originally Russian land lies 5,500 versts from Moscow. Stunning nature, land rich in resources, yet every fifth Buryat lives below the poverty line. People are on the brink of starvation, literally dying from hunger. This wasn't made up by Soros or Biden. These are official Russian statistics.
Experts from Rosstat, in their analysis, compared the minimum consumer basket not with incomes, but instead with expenses for food, other goods, and a variety of different services. And in our republic, expenses per family member in the first half of 2022 were estimated at 14,666 rubles. Minimum subsistence was 14,597.
In Buryatia, as in other national regions, the standard of living is the lowest in Russia. Not in Switzerland. In Russia! The scenery, of course, is like Switzerland, but there's a catch. Less than 1 million people live in Buryatia, and that's considering Buryatia is bigger than Italy. There are 247 developed gold deposits in Buryatia. About 6 tons of precious metal are mined there every year. That's approximately $500 million. Gold vein, gold vein, gold vein, gold vein. Buryatia also mines uranium, aluminum, coal, and 48% of all Russian zinc. Ironic. Before the invasion of Ukraine, zinc was exported from Buryatia, but now it's being imported back. In terms of percentage, Buryats are among the top groups of occupiers killed. They were driven to slaughter in the front ranks, and this has been going on since 1914. But we'll talk about the sacrifice of the Buryats a bit later. First, let's talk about the plundering of the Buryats.
And then they just snatch it up. Let's see. Are we actually even interested in this today or not?
We were all surprised and outraged that during World War II, the Germans took away the black soil. Now, the Russians are literally taking water out of Buryatia. Moscow is selling Baikal's fresh water to China. This is destroying the flora and fauna of this unique place in the most outrageous way. The Moscow vacuum cleaner is sucking absolutely everything out of the region. This is what the Golden Klondike looks like, the Buryat El Dorado.
In Buryatia, 19.5% of the republic's residents have fallen below the poverty line. This poverty line is determined by the population's income.
The cornucopia on the coat of arms of Ulan-Ude looks like a mockery. From this horn, the only thing that rains down on the Buryats are draft notices to the front.
It's truly horrifying for absolutely everyone. People are dragged out of bed at night and without any questions, fit or unfit, how old they are, how many children they have. They take large families, even the disabled, people with only one eye. There's a story from relatives. A man with only one eye was taken.
Of course, an unreasonably large number of Buryats voluntarily sign contracts with the Ork army. But that's because they live in abject poverty. A resident of Buryatia couldn't earn 200,000 a month, not even in dreams with unicorns. Can you imagine what kind of state people have to be driven to for them to agree to travel 7,000 kilometers just to die?
The national republics are deliberately driven by the authorities into such a state of deep and persistent poverty, because living in poverty and having a constant lack of money and resources means being forced into dependence. In this way, the regions that become the most dependent, with no real means to support themselves, can then be sent as cannon fodder to the territory of Ukraine, using the conflict as expendable people.
Putin has driven the Buryats to the point where a meat assault is the only decent job and the only way to advance your career. Let me repeat, this is in a region where there is more gold than in the mouths of all the Serbian gypsies combined. Buryatia is a typical colony, And the Russians' attitude toward the Buryats matches that.
I've been to Moscow 3 times, and each time I was seen as Chinese or anyone else, but never as a Russian citizen. They've all come here. It's a pity my son is still at war. He really needs to come back here and start shooting.
But it wasn't always like this. Once upon a time, it was the Buryats who kept the bashful, spiritual Russians under their boot. The Buryats are descendants of the Xiongnu people who once terrified all of Asia. It was specifically to defend against the Xiongnu that the Chinese Emperor Qin Shi Huang built the Great Wall of China. The Xiongnu had their own statehood and writing system even before the birth of Christ. Later, these Xiongnu came to Europe, where they were known as the Huns, and they brought down Rome. And what did the ancestors of the Russians have at that time? A stick to knock pinacones off the fir trees.
Ooh, come on! Ooh!
In 1206, Buryatia became part of the great Mongol Empire of Genghis Khan. It was the arrival of the Mongols that practically completed the formation of the Buryat ethnic group. So, as part of the Mongol army, the Buryats conquered Moscow and collected tribute from the future Russians for 200 years. But unlike the Russians, the Buryats were civilized conquerors. They did not destroy the culture of the conquered peoples, nor did they force the locals to become Buryats. It was strictly business, nothing personal. They even opened a medieval AliExpress with China.
I'm on Ali, you're on Ali. In fact, we're all on Ali together, every single one of us.
But when the vast Russian Empire spread its chicken wings in the 17th century, the Russians acted like real barbarians in Buryatia, what is now Siberia. Unfortunately, the Buryats lost the war with Moscow, and in 1729 became part of the Prison of Nations.
Honestly, I'm ashamed to even say that I'm from Ulan-Ude, from that city, from that village. I have no respect for that city, none at all. Absolutely no respect for their traditions or anything else. Absolutely none.
The Buryats were essentially enslaved by the Muscovites. They were burdened with heavy taxes. On top of that, Russia brought corruption and imperial lawlessness to Buryatia. Even the ruthless and cruel Tsar Peter the Great reproached his officials, saying that the Buryats were forced to sell their own children into slavery just to pay taxes.
What the fuck?
And the Buryats had only one way to reduce their tax burden. They had to become Russian, renounce their own faith, and convert to Orthodoxy. That's why many ethnic Buryats started calling themselves by Slavic names, just to avoid starving to death. In other words, Russia essentially imposed a huge tax on the right to consider yourself a Buryat, and all the privileges were reserved only for the superior race.
Let's imagine for a moment that our hypothetical Buryat individual has successfully gotten a job, having managed to get through all the various interview stages and is now actually working in a new environment. What kinds of situations or challenges might he encounter in the workplace? For example, he could face ethnic discrimination at work. Again, there are studies and research findings that confirm that there is a so-called glass ceiling for non-white employees, which makes it significantly much harder for them to move up the career ladder than it is for their white colleagues. Once again, I think this applies to the realities in Russia as well.
Racist.
This is real Nazism and ethno-cultural genocide. The Buryats were literally Russified under the threat of starvation. Now the situation has become even worse.
By nationality,
Russian.
we're Buryats.
I am Russian.
I am a Buryat woman. Grandfather Buryat. You Buryat?
No, I am Russian.
But why are you Russian then?
Because
According to the latest census, there are twice as many Russians living in Buryatia as there are Buryats. This is considering that, by natural means, ethnic Russians could not possibly have ended up in the Baikal region 5,000 kilometers away from their traditional area of residence. In other words, in Buryatia, there was a deliberate policy of population replacement. For several centuries now, Moscow has been trying to destroy the Buryat people. And besides direct genocide, the empire had another method of exterminating the Buryats. They were always conscripted into the army en masse. By the end of the 18th century, every seventh Buryat was a serviceman.
I don't really know how to keep serving you, Tsar, not anymore.
because I'm in very harsh conditions. I even have heart problems. I don't know if I live long enough to see the right moment. The one I've been waiting for since they're sending me to the battlefield to fight once again.
They took part in all the imperial wars, dying for the Tsar in the Crimean, Japanese and First World Wars. 200 years later, nothing has changed.
Hello, Cheetah. Hello, Ulan-Ude. Cheetah, Yaznogorsk, against Pusochi.
Now Buryatia is no longer associated with an ancient great people, with a wonderful culture and a beautiful land. All over the world, Buryatia is now associated with killers and looters, occupiers and unscrupulous mercenaries who are willing to kill in another country for a bonus.
In Buryatia, the selection of candidates for military service under contract continues. This past weekend, the authorities lifted many restrictions for those wishing to sign a contract. The ranks of the army can now be joined by those with suspended sentences, individuals with unexpunged criminal records, people currently serving sentences, as well as those under investigation.
Of course, not all Buryats are like that. Many, even after ending up in Putin's army, refuse to fight against Ukraine. They write statements refusing to serve. According to Free Buryatia, at the beginning of July 2022, 150 refuseniks returned to Ulan-Ude after being held in a concentration camp in the Luhansk region. By July 9, 2022, around 500 Buryats had already refused to become war criminals. As a rule, all of them were subjected to repression and torture.
The Ukrainians haven't done anything to me, so there's absolutely no desire to go there with a rifle, let alone shoot at someone. No hate.
Among the Buryats, there are a great many true descendants of the Shongnu who not only refused to fight for Putin, they began to fight against Putin on the side of Ukraine. There are a lot of ethnic Buryats fighting in the Siberian battalion, and they are highly motivated.
We ourselves allowed, Putin to get to this point, to stay in power for so many years, even though it was obvious all around us where we live, how we live. My call sign is Buryat. I serve in the Siberian battalion of the International Legion. I was born and raised in Ulan-Ude.
These people are fighting not only for Ukraine. They are fighting for the freedom of Buryatia. And they will definitely win. Because all empires eventually collapse, and under the rubble, rat kings and nightingale sausages perish.
You don't prepare the strike just comes on its own. That is quietly, calmly.
The Buryat people must reclaim their ancestral homeland and ensure that their wealth is distributed fairly among all, for the benefit of their people. And, first of all, they should absolutely and completely prohibit the drink known as Baikal, as it seriously tarnishes the good name and reputation of the Great Lake.
I would like to remind you that this video is created for entertainment purposes and contains elements of satire and irony. All facts and events are presented in a hyperbolized or exaggerated form to convey a comedic or dramatic effect. Our goal is not to mislead, but to highlight humor. Please take it with a smile.